next up, we're going to walk through the Sensor Tower and Data AI mobile app marketing forecast. So for the folks who are listening only, this might make a little less sense. We'll try and articulate all the things that we are displaying on the screen, but I will be sharing the window and it will be much more helpful for you to follow along. Interestingly, this is the first piece of content Sensor Tower plus Data AI have put out since the acquisition. Interested to see how this develops over time. One of the things I'll say is these guys are definitely pushing a narrative, and we'll talk to that as we sort of drill in a little bit more. So executive summary, this is the most interesting part. So overall, their data set, Sensor Tower and Data AI are forecasting massive growth over the next 6 years through 2030. Some top line numbers, they expect global spending to hit 288 billion. That's mobile global spending by 230. And that is in aggregate for this decade, that is the decade of 2021 through 2030, the total aggregate global spend will be 2.2 trillion, up 267% from the previous decade. So they're projecting astronomical, sustained, continued growth over the next 6 years to close out the decade.
Well, one thing I would note, though, is even in their own forecast, they're definitely projecting an overall lower compound annual growth rate than what we've had historically. But I think, the main theme is like after a relatively flat period in some of these areas, like projecting back to a growth phase.
Correct. That being said, these numbers are the number, it gets harder and harder to hit the growth rates that we had previously compared as larger, and mobile and gaming get to be just a huge, larger and larger part of the global economy overall. But totally.
That's true. Yeah, it's just the law of large numbers exactly. at the size of the industry that we're getting to now.
Exactly what I was thinking. So a couple other numbers, top line numbers, saying global download, they project global downloads at 347 billion in 2030. And for the decade, they project a 2.9 trillion downloads, which is again 123% increase over the previous decade. Not crazy high numbers, but a lot. And the trends basically also extrapolate out for time spent. So we'll dig into a bunch of the subcomponents here, but Warren, just stopping really quick, is there anything here that is raised a red flag? Do you buy this at the highest level?
Well, the interesting thing for anyone who's watching this on video is like while we had like a flattening off period from consumer spending, it did not we saw continued healthy growth in just like how much time people spent on their phones.
Yeah.
So it's almost like it seems like a pretty direct reflection of the state of the economy. It's not like people had less interest in playing games and in being active on their phones. They just had less money to spend for a few years.
Yeah, and there's some pretty interesting graphs that come later, which we can talk to this explicitly. Cool. COVID impact. So this is something we've talked about a lot, but I just thought the way that they articulated this was particularly interesting. So if you take a look here, what we see are the world split into its major regions, and then this is a growth percentage by 3-year band. And what we see is basically massive growth across all geographies from 2017 to 2019, and then growth, but differentiated growth the next few years. And then just someone slammed on the brakes super hard. And so they articulate this as coming out of the COVID pandemic. And you see the growth, the massive growth going into COVID across most of the world. Specifically in the US, you're seeing this early COVID huge surge. And then you see a market correction, is how they refer to it. Warren, is there anything else you could think of that happened during this time period that might have caused the growth to moderate?
Well, I'm assuming, Xander, you're referring to the ever-present elephant in the room of the iOS privacy changes that killed a lot of growth marketing for mobile apps. Did I guess right?
You guessed right. I mean, again, we only have like 3 takes. We say them over and over again. It's actually astounding to me that they didn't call this out in their report at all. There is no place where, at least I didn't read it closely enough. I found no mention of ATT or SKAN at any point in this report, which just seems like maybe they're trying not to piss off Apple. Like that's got to be why they're not articulating, because this is so clearly to me a story about iOS, ATT and SKAN being rolled out, that hamstringing the industry, kneecapping the industry, and then over the last several years, people figuring out how to actually operate in this new, or sorry, not in the last several years, like basically this year and last year, people figure out how to navigate and get return to growth. And so I think that's just a really interesting trend.
I think there's also a more simple thing here, which is just sort of like when you think about data AI and Sensor Tower, what are the data streams that they're focused on? And what is that lens drive about how they view these insights? So to be a little more explicit, to the best of my knowledge and from the reports here, nothing in this, whenever they talk about spend, they're talking about spend in app. They don't have inputs, to the best of my knowledge, of ad spend in a granular way of seeing the spend trends. They only see the outcome from that. So I think they're deducing factors based on only looking at one side of the equation, not looking at what was happening. It's like, why did, Facebook ads have massive layoffs? Why did all of these ad networks have massive layoffs and downsizing? It was because people were spending less on growth because half of their ecosystem was essentially cut off and they weren't able to scale profitably, and in some cases cut off as much half of their revenue. So yeah, I think it's almost like they don't have the right data input in these reports to additionally have that insight.
Yeah. And this trend specifically...
Data AI, feel free to come at us if anything we said is incorrect.
Yeah, we'll have you on the podcast. I'm happy to. This is consumer spends, right? So this is basically the IAP revenue that they're seeing on their end. So I think that's an interesting story. I maybe am over indexing for how much I blame Apple for this. We shouldn't write off the fact that people are, after being stuck inside for COVID, people did get outside more and spend less time on their phone, or at least spend less money on their phone. Okay, this is another really, really interesting graph. This, I think, was maybe one of my most unexpected graphs of the whole report. So what this is consumer spend growth and IAP purchases, basically, versus disposable incomes split between apps and games. And we're looking at the one in the US. So what do you see? From 2017, when the data set starts, to Q2 of last year, you see basically a run-up in disposable income, a peak during what people call like the COVID stimmy period, and then sort of a leveling off. And you see consumer game spend trend that almost perfectly. Basically, as you get more disposable income, you spend more money in games. As the disposable income pulls back, you spend less on games. That seems reasonable. The thing that's bizarre to me, and I actually do not know, and I would love someone that says a Tower or Data AI to come explain this to me, is what you don't see is app-based spending, application consumer spend, so non-game apps. The trend of spend is completely uncorrelated to disposable income. What that means is, as people, no matter whether or not people have incremental disposable income, they're spending more money on apps. So in other words, the phone is taking a bigger and bigger pie of the global wallet share, irregardless of how poor people are getting, which this is fascinating to me. I don't even know, I'm very curious what these apps are. I did not expect this, and this is probably the most interesting piece of data for me. But Warren, what do you think about this? Any thoughts?
Yeah, this is a great view. And I was just a little critical of, some of the other views in data AI that they're, maybe not enough critical thinking into some of the causes, but I think this is a great thing to call out. And it makes sense too, like as phones become more powerful, they become more our default devices. Like my partner, she hasn't opened up her laptop in, I think, literally over a year now, and just lives off of her phone. So I think that's one aspect of this, is just drawing more of your versions of utilities, like things that you just use to power your day-to-day life. Those are centered on your phone in that non-gaming spend. And I know for me, and more anecdotal, I think about most of my non-gaming apps as non-negotiables. They've added some sort of utility to my life. And as phones get better and technology gets more innovative, like there's just more and more utilities that are centralized on my phone.
Right.
So I think this is a really insightful view, and props to data.ai, because I would not have thought of even framing the data this way to get this insight.
Yeah, and we focus on games, so forgive us for that. One thing that Casey said was like Instagram, DoorDash, Uber. I mean, I'm an Uber addict now. It's like I don't know how to live without it, right? I mean, if they're capturing that. But, Uber has become such an indispensable part of my life. I don't know what we do without it. Cool. So there's a bunch of data here. We're going to jump ahead a little bit to consumer apps versus games. This is another look at the same data set. Basically, what they're saying in this data set, so this is from 2027 through 2030, which is forecasted, they're anticipating games growth to compound, this is consumer spend, basically incremental spend of games to compound at 4.2% annually, while app spend to compound at 11.1%. So basically, this is another view of the same trend. They're basically saying apps are becoming a more and more important part of the mix, and they're growing aggressively. Warren, should we pivot, become an app marketing company? We basically already are.
Same reason why there's ironically more growth on mobile outside of the segment, which is, bear with me on this tangent. So part of why, we from a business, we love games, but like more practically, games have a replicable playbook. It's like the average game is iterating on, call it one to two axes, but taking a lot of fundamentals from games that have come before it. Therefore, like profitably bringing a game to market also learns from the past, iterates on past tactics. At the same time, as we get more and more games on the market, the incremental value of each game to the consumer becomes a little diminished. You can only play so many games in your waking hours. Tie that back to what we were talking about a second ago, which is that as phones grow more robust, the amount of in-life utility that you can drive from them and unique offerings that manifest in unique non-gaming apps, that continues to increase. Right. So again, this I think is a really insightful view, and that's at least my projection on why I think we see this sort of starting to flatten of growth of there's less unique reasons to add an incremental additional game on your phone versus an incremental non-gaming app. I can say like from a personal trend standpoint, that's definitely been my trend as well. Just like more functional non-gaming apps that I'm interacting with on a daily basis. Whereas like a few years back, I think it was primarily gaming and, occasionally, mapping, messaging.
And also I think
non-gaming apps.
Yeah, totally agree. I also think there's been fairly low innovation in gaming, which like, if you think about what's going to drive very massive accelerated adoption in the gaming side, you're going to need innovative experiences. Otherwise it's going to be incremental because we're replaying old tactics and playbooks.
I would asterisk that. I think there's been low innovation in mobile free-to-play games.
Sorry, I think we're seeing. Totally agree. That is what I meant when I said that. But yeah, completely agree. There are many innovative business models, and games as a whole are like exploding. Is that the term? Just all over the place with how we're developing games overall. Okay, we're going to skip ahead again because I want to go to this one. This one's very, very relevant to us, and this I think is interesting, and I'm very skeptical of this view. Okay, so what are we looking at? This is consumer spend by game genre, both from 2020 through now, real data, and then extrapolate out to 2030. And what you see is basically every category, RPG, strategy, match, casino, simulation, and action, peaked over COVID in 2021, and then has since receded to in 2023, and is either leveling or maybe slightly growing. Now, what Sensor Tower did, and I'm not 100% sure where they got this, they're basically saying, guys, don't worry about it. It's all going up. Every genre is going up. I'm not so sure. I mean, it's possible. I mean, I think we're at least seeing a leveling. I mean, these are modest growth rates, like 5% compounded annual growth. Okay, maybe that's just such a modest number that just inflates. It's like basically pegged to inflation or something. It's like, maybe I could believe that, but I don't necessarily think it's self-evident that every game category is going to grow over the next 6 years. More, any additional thoughts here?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is like, if you're ever like hanging out at like Wall Street Bets and on Reddit, and someone like posts a chart of like a horrible like penny stock that they're like have some like wonky projection out about like how it's been going out, but like look at the trend, like it's clearly about to go back up. That's kind of like what all these lines look like. Like the historical trend does not look like what the future forecast is for any of these genres. Yeah, I think a little bit of wishful thinking is being forecast on here.
Yeah, agreed. And let's just jump ahead because there's a bunch, but they have a similar, almost replicated graph for downloads as well. And so Data AI / Sensor Tower, holler at us. We'd love to have you on the podcast to explain your thinking here. But yeah, we'll just leave it at that for this because we have a couple more views. It's a great report, very big, very interesting. Highly recommend anyone who is interested in to go check it out. But we'll jump ahead. So this is also the same view. This is just time spent by hours in game genre. Again, very, very similar trend. Basically, time spent, downloads, apps. Don't worry, guys. It's going up. And I wonder if part of this is like this, they need to paint the story for their investors to get people excited about it. I don't know. I'm not really sure what's going on here, but let's give benefit of the doubt there. Okay, so one last view. There's a ton more in here, but I think for the sake of your sanity and ours, we're just going to land on one final set of views. This is consumer spend by region. This is really interesting. Basically, what you see is the last 2 years and then a projection for 2030. And what we're seeing is pretty unexpected, but I just sort of want to call it out. I mean, Asia, North America, Europe dominate consumer spend. Emerging markets are growing reasonably fast. You can see that here. So on a per person basis, North America is growing faster in terms of consumer spend, but just the aggregate and dominant position that Asia has as a market is just so clear here. And again, we'll see how this plays out. I mean, there are some demographic trends that I think major Asian countries have to think about. But I mean, is there anything surprising? This isn't surprising to me, but I think it is just an interesting component to end on.
Yeah, I think this mirrors the trends that we kind of see in the trenches of where we see the most emerging opportunities for profitable growth, like marketing games. Like, we should look at the expected compound annual growth rate, and we see this is more in like Central America, Oceania, South America, Middle East, Africa. And this is kind of is where we see the most emerging opportunities in the market now to date. Like, these are the markets that are catching up the quickest on technology adoption. And it makes sense that they have the most prominent near-term growth opportunities. So yeah, Asia, North America, they're not going to become displaced anytime soon as the primary revenue driving markets, but it's clear that they are reaching a saturation point as far as like how much of the market is unaddressed and can still kind of come into fruition as new active mobile app economy members.
Yep. Cool. Well, that's all we're going to do today. We will link the data AI report in the show notes. Please check it out if you're interested. Sensor Tower/data AI. If we said anything wrong, let us know. We're happy to talk about it on the podcast. Otherwise, Warren, that's it for us. Do you want to take us out?
Yeah, as always, the pod was brought to you by our team here at Upptic. Here at Upptic, we do all things to help games grow. In case you haven't figured it out, we love games. We nerd about all things about games and the games industry. And yeah, we spend most of our day talking to game teams, trying to figure out how to help them solve their problems, either through the services we provide around user acquisition, creative, app store optimization, everything you need your marketing team to do. We are that team for you if you don't have your own team. And then also, if you have a marketing team, surprise, you can use our tools. We'll share our playbook and the tech that we've built with you. And hopefully you can get some similar cool outcomes for growing your games that we've been able to get for some of the games that we support, because we are sharing and caring like that. So if you're trying to scale a game, we're happy to talk and see how we can help. You can reach us through our website. That's upptic.com, upptic.com.
Talk soon.